Right, so greetings, hello, guests and friends. So this is our second annual Druid lecture here at Avebury. The idea is to celebrate the ancient wisdom of this place, which is, thousands of years old. And many people come here and look around at the stones. But I think, as a philosopher and a historian, my hope is that we can get an annual lecture as well to celebrate intellectually what is this standing for, this place, its heritage. It's a World Heritage Site, so we should celebrate that for the world. And but what is actually the heritage we're celebrating here? Why does it matter? And does it have anything to say to the current time of chaos and confusion on planet Earth? That's what I'm going to be talking about. So firstly, just to say that we founded this lecture last year, and I hope it will carry on each year. I'm over from France for this, especially. It's a chance for everyone who loves Avebury and appreciates the kind of sanctity of the place. And we're in the main Christian church in Avebury because it might be raining outside. And it's a beautiful ancient place itself. I first came to this church, there was a huge display in honour of Mary Magdalene, with flowers arranged in different colours. Apparently that's a thing among the church. Red at the bottom, going through oranges, yellows up to white. That's a symbolic flower display for Mary Magdalene, which I didn't realise, which they celebrate here in this church, although it's dedicated to St. James. And it was part of the pilgrim route to St. James of Compostela in Spain. And there's a scallop shell on the entrance. So, what I'm interested about Druids, the reason I got interested in Druidry about 30 years ago now, was in my studies at the University of London, and even before that, I was studying in Canada and then at the British Museum Library, discovering that the ancient Celts had a very profound metaphysical tradition, which is not lost to us completely, although it's hardly ever taught about in schools. I was head of religious studies for 10 years in British schools. I always included it, but I was somewhat unusual. Most RE teachers don't mention it. I think that's sad because that is the native tradition of Britain and Ireland and Gaul, where I now live in France. In Japan, they celebrate their native ancient wisdom, Shinto tradition, alongside Buddhism, which is regarded as a new interloper. I think we should do the same in Britain. We should celebrate the ancient wisdom of the ancient peoples alongside Christianity and other religions, Islam, Judaism, and all the others that have come to Britain, Hinduism. But what about the native pagan traditions? So that's why I went back looking at the ancient texts in, the sources that have come down. They were written down by monks and nuns in medieval Ireland and Wales. Precious texts that have come down. They survived orally for thousands of years. So the first thing is the Druid path is an oral teaching. And I've been blessed to meet people who were themselves taught orally and so on, going back. In as far as we know, to the depths of antiquity. I met a chap called Douglas Lyne who'd been on a ship going out to Alexandria during World War II. He was in the British 8th Army, was in El Alamein. And he met the Archdruid of Wales on the same ship. And he was part of the people that set up the Council of British Druid Orders, which I'm the peace officer for. And so I celebrate Douglas here as well. He later, after the war, he fought in the Battle of Monte Cassino as an artillery chap and was actually horrified by the war. He was revulsed by the mass killing of World War II on all sides. So he devoted his life to peacemaking after that. And he became friends with the abbot of Monte Cassino, who dedicated a chapel in the hill on the top, the mountain, of the abbey founded by St. Benedict, to peace. And each of the nations that fought in the Battle of Monte Cassino put a window of stained glass in. at their own expense. So the Poles, the Czechs, the Germans, the Italians, the English, the Australians, the Americans. And each time the window was dedicated, the veterans of Europe for peace would gather and dedicate it with the abbot's blessing. And he was our member for that. So he made me go on pilgrimage. I promised him when he died I would go to Casino, which I did en route to the World Congress of Philosophy in 2013 in Athens. I went via southern Italy and went up to Monte Cassino, which I think really one should do, everybody should do. The site of Monte Cassino is on a temple to Apollo in ancient times, classical times, and Benedict got fed up with Rome's corruption, retired there as a hermit and founded the Benedictine monastic order, which at one time ran lots of abbeys in the British Isles as well and all over Europe, and dedicated to peace and scholarship and study. They all had a library and a scriptorium. And so we've just yesterday saw one in Romsey, not far from here, which was a female Benedictine nunnery for 1,000 years, founded in the 9th century AD. So I think that there's a continuity between those sort of Christian sages and scholars and saints and the original Druids who would have been here in Avebury for thousands of years before Christianity. The reason I'm interested is because as peace officer to the Council of British Druid Orders, I think peace is the key thing the Druids stood for. The word Druid meant a dharma seer in Sanskrit. The first letters, D-R, Dur, meant the oak tree as well in Welsh and Gaelic. And the Druids loved the oak because it's the strongest of all trees. It endures the storms, and it lasts for 1,000 or more years. And we've just come through Savernake Forest, where are these ancient oaks, some of them 1,500 years old. So the Dur is the one that lasts, that is the oldest, wisest. And in the metaphysical world, the Dharma comes from the same root, D-U-R-D-H-A-R. I've written a dictionary of comparative philology, looking at ancient roots of words, and therefore we know that Dharma and Druid come from the same root. And it was a Welsh Druid, actually, Sir William Jones from Wales, a polymath who was an Oxford graduate, where I used to teach, and he went and became the head of the legal system in Calcutta when the British were in Bengal in the late 1700s, and he was fluent in Greek, Latin, Persian, Arabic, Welsh, and he was a Druid from Wales who wrote poetry in bardic style in Welsh. He ends up in Calcutta learning Sanskrit. He had a Brahmin come in and teach him because he wanted to read the original laws of the Indians so that British law would not counteract or he wanted to blend in and keep the laws but just change it a bit. So we abolished human sacrifice, we abolished sati, where the women would be obliged to kind of kill themselves when the husband died. We abolished things like that, so he wanted to read the laws in Sanskrit. He learned Sanskrit, and he realised it comes from the same family root as Welsh and German and English and Anglo-Saxon. And he coined the phrase Indo-European to mean. And so the word Dharma is from an Indo-European root, the same as Dur and Druid. So when I realised that, I got very interested because I thought, so you mean we had native wisdom elders here in these islands, just like the yogis or the Buddhists in India? Yes, and it was them that built these stones and Stonehenge. So the one thing we do know about, we know several things about the Druids from classical authors because they wrote down, based on interviews and talks. One of the most famous philosophers of antiquity was called Posidonius, a Stoic philosopher, another polymath from Rhodes. He was learned in all the Platonic thought, Aristotelian thought. He lived around the time of, sort of from about 70 BC down through, and he was a friend of Pompey, the the Roman general defending the Senate and the Republic against Caesar. And Pompey honoured Posidonius so much that when he came to Rhodes and he was working in his study, he always put a guard outside, a guard of honour, outside Posidonius' study. And when he came in and out, the guards had to salute him, because Pompey said, this guy is worth 100 legions, you know. Anyway, Posidonius, who was a Stoic, which meant a sort of synthesis of all the ancient wisdom, he went on a pilgrimage to Gaul to study Druidry. And he went and lived among the Celts for a couple of years, taking notes, doing some anthropological field research, studying what they felt. He knew that they were like the ancient Greeks and Platonists. They believed in reincarnation. They believed in the immortality of the soul. They believed in righteous action and truth. And the point of the seers, the priests, was to keep the peace. And he said the Druids were the peacekeepers of the Celtic peoples. Because like humans everywhere, you know, people quarrel and there are tribal factions and they might start a fight. So then the Druids would go into action and prevent the actual fighting getting out of hand. We know that's also true from Caesar, because although Caesar conquered Gaul and in a military operation of great, ferocity actually, conquered them, he also respected them and he honoured the wisdom that he found, and he became friends with certain Druids, and being a literate guy, he wrote down what he learned. Chartres was the great Druid stronghold in Gaul. Now, Caesar also knew that the Celts, the Druids of Gaul, were in touch with the Druids of Britain. And other classical authors always talked about the ancient temples here in Britain, and this is one of them. We're in the middle of one of the greatest of these temples, which were thousands of years BC, that we now think, the first stones here in Avebury went up around 3000 BC, when the first pyramids were being put up. And people were travelling much more than we realise, so people would have come from Avebury to Gaul, studied, taught, gone on maybe to Egypt, back to Ireland. And the other thing about the Druids is they were honoured and respected wherever they were, whichever tribe. So if you were a wandering Druid, you had like, have you got my staff here? You had like a badge of immunity. This is my Druid wand, which was made for me by a Druid in Ireland, out of bog oak. It shows the snake. And this also became a symbol of Asclepius and the medical profession, because Druids were also the doctors, the healers of antiquity. And if the Celtic tribes needed, knowledge about which herbs to use for medicine, they would turn to the Druids. Often the female Druids would have that knowledge. Okay. So they had an immunity, and their job was to be like the diplomats or the peacemakers between the tribes. And they were inviolable. You couldn't, you wouldn't kill a Druid. It was like a crime against God, the gods. It would reach, scream out to heaven, And so this is the origin of diplomatic immunity. Nowadays, among the ambassadors, you have immunity. Well, it goes back to those ancient times. So I thought, okay, when I discovered all this in my student years at the University of London, I thought, shouldn't this be revived? Surely Druidry still matters, therefore. If we're going to get peace on this planet, that seems to be the one thing we can't find. Conventional scientific thought, and I've worked with social scientists working on conflict resolution theory and peace studies and so on. They take a quantified kind of approach to things. But, we're not getting peace, are we? Look at what's happening in Gaza. Look at the mass killing of people just because there are different religions slightly. And so how can we end the conflict between Hamas and the Israeli Defense Force? And the Christians seem to be getting it in the middle, because they're innocent, really neutral, and yet they're being bombed to smithereens. So I think it's really important. And on the 21st of September, just a few days ago, I was part of a team in Ireland we've just launched a lex innocentium for the 21st century, which is a new law of the innocents. And I have the text of the law, whereby we're renewing the law of Adomnan, who was a great Celtic saint from Iona. He was the abbot of Iona up in north of Scotland, where I used to live. And in 697 AD, he passed this law, the law of the innocents, which he wrote out in Latin and Gaelic. And it declared it illegal to kill a non-combatant, so a woman or a child or a non-combatant who's not involved in the fighting. You're not allowed to kill them in the middle of the battle or whatever. And it was passed in 697 AD, and loads of people signed it, kings, chieftains, people came from Scotland, bishops. We know the names because that list has come down in history. And what we've done is we've just reissued the Lex Innocentium for the 21st century on the 21st of September, a few days ago. And I'm inviting people to sign it, which is really a declaration we want the kind of wars that are going on, which slaughter the innocents, don't make a distinction, to cease. It doesn't have legal authority, it's not passed by the UN. They already have the Geneva Convention. Ours is a moral, spiritual law, which we can voluntarily subscribe to. All it means is if we ever find ourselves in that kind of situation, we will never, under any circumstances, kill someone who's an innocent. And if only, humanity would take that path. Now, Iona was a Druid island. Adomnan was a descendant of Columba, who was the Irish Christian who wanted the ancient wisdom of the bards and druids to survive within Christianity. There was no tension, and he saw Christ as an archdruid. In one of his sayings, he said, "Christ is my archdruid," because he was the peace giver, the way shower. So I think, therefore, Druidry still does matter, and that's why, as a Christian Druid myself, I see this blending of the wisdom of Christ and the non-violence that he taught as totally compatible with the wisdom of the ancient Druids. So what would Druidry have to say now? Imagine these saints came back to life and they were here in our gathering. To today's complex geopolitical conflicts. We have a world here swirling with half-truths. We've invented this wonderful internet, which is, fantastic. We can be in touch with people all over the world. But people are misusing it to spread misinformation, lies. There's cyber warfare going on, which is a form of violence. All that should cease. I've called for a truth oath for parliamentarians, and I'm going to tell that to the newly elected MP for Devizes, a Liberal Democrat, who I think might understand what I'm saying. We have to get all MPs in Parliament to take an oath that they will never lie in their official role as MPs. And recently they have been doing. Governments think they can get away with it. They get intoxicated with power, and they think they're immune to cosmic law. The whole point of Christianity and Druidry is to say, no, above normal kind of social law, there's cosmic law, which is metaphysically based, which is about divine eternal truths. And they're hinged on this idea of righteousness and truth, which is, every page in the Bible makes that plain, but also every page of the Druid Bible, which is nature. The trees teach us that. And we sit here, we gather underneath a peace tree with beautiful hopes for peace written out before a flame which was transmitted from the Hiroshima peace flame. So, this is very important. Our civilization might collapse and lead to destruction if we don't abide by truth. That's the core message from the Druids, as it is from the Christians. But not everyone is aware of this. Some people think with Christianity it's just a ritual. If you do the sacraments, you go to church, that's enough. No, it's not. You have to understand the metaphysics underlying it. Just the same with Druids. To do the rituals, to do the ceremonies isn't enough. You have to understand the metaphysics behind it. So I think, yes, it has a lot to say about this. and especially the way the internet's been misused in the way that the extreme right wing has politicized it with misinformation, the invasion of Ukraine. And I was shocked when I read recently a book called Spies by Calder Walton. It's a history of Britain and Russia and misinformation. This has been going on a very long time. And another book by Timothy Snyder, professor of history at Yale University, expert on Ukrainian Russian history. Apparently, the history of the misinformation being put out by the Bolshevik government began very early. I've just finished a biography of Lenin and one of Stalin. As a historian, my PhD is in all this history, and I think it's terrible that governments actually deliberately misuse misinformation to spread lies and fear to demoralize other people. It's been going on a long time. And from a Druid perspective, this is illegal, immoral. You know, we had the authority over the warriors and over the political leaders of the tribes. And our duty was to make them stick according to moral law and spiritual law. So in Tara, where the High Kings of Ireland were crowned and blessed, it was the Druids that said whether somebody was fit to serve or not. And we would give them certain spiritual tests for their morality and their righteousness. And if they were liars and they were going to misuse office, they would be out. We had the power to sack them. Well, I mean that was the point of the Christian tradition, because the king is crowned by the archbishop, anointed, just as Saul was anointed originally. And the old kings of Judah or Israel, it was the same. They had to abide by the prophets and by the teachings of the law. The Druids were the equivalent of the prophets for the Celtic tribes, exactly the same functionality. And if they misbehaved, they had to lose office, because people in power should always remember they're there to serve the people, not to dominate, rule, and so on. Unfortunately, the Stalinist regime completely misunderstood that, and it began under Lenin. They assumed they had absolute authority over the people, and then if you disagreed with their policies, you got shot. And so there began this witch hunting, these pogroms, and this violence against the people themselves in the name of, the party. It was the same in Hitler's Germany, in the name of the fascist or Nazi party. You were entitled to round people up, and put them in concentration camps because they were the wrong type of people or whatever. All this was against cosmic law, obviously. And yet, on the internet, that's what's happening, because people are using misinformation to spread lies, to gain what they now call informational dominance or narrative dominance. So my colleagues doing conflict research are now aware of this. I'm saying we have to have a solemn commitment to truth by the world leaders, by the world's democracies, that none of our politicians are allowed to lie, and they're not allowed to use intelligence agents to officially lie on their behalf. We know that in Russia, the GRU, as it's called, has a whole unit to spread disinformation in the internet, and have been doing it for the last 15 years or so, bringing hard right forces into power because it destabilizes democracies. So, as a Druid for peace, I think this is all against cosmic law, and we need to remind people of that. But I don't think it's the time for silence. Some spiritual people say, "Oh no, that's all politics. That's nothing to do with me. I'm going to be quiet and just maintain my serene silence." And there's a place for silence. Silence is a very powerful thing. I'm a great respecter of silence in worship. In the Quaker worship, Anglicans often have silent spaces in their services, and I'm a great believer in the power of silence in Buddhist meditation and so on. But there's also a time for speaking up, and that's what the word professor means. A professor is someone that professes and speaks out. And it's the same root as the word prophet. prophetes in ancient Greek meant someone who would speak out from the place of the gods. I'm part of the the Delphic Academy. I'm the director of the Delphic Academy. We're trying to revive not just the Delphic Games and the Delphic Academy, whose symbol was Know Thyself, which is the root of all education as it was for the Druids, but also we're trying to revive the Delphic Oracle, because we believe that the Delphic Oracle, which was shut by ignorant Christians who were afraid of prophetic powers, misunderstood the plot. There's this kind of idea that, well, Christ, he was the final prophet, the absolute prophet of all time. But the trouble is that, hang on, then the Muslims came along and said, no, that's not true. Our prophet's the final prophet. And that can go on ad infinitum. We can have prophet wars till the end of time, with each new group saying theirs is the best prophet. What I'm saying as a Druid is actually, potentially, we're all prophets. We have that ovate skill within us. If our schools and our education were a bit more sorted, they would encourage our future intelligence, as my friend in Israel has written a book called Future Intelligence, Shlomo Soham. He was the chap in the Israeli Knesset who was asked to look at all the legislation, whether it would withstand 7 generations from hence. Would 7 generations future respect the Knesset for passing that law? And that's an idea. You have an ombudsman for the future. Israel has it, Sweden has one, and we also have it in Wales now. The Welsh Senate has a future ombudsman. And so Shlomo was asking, well, what is future intelligence? It's being aware of how our actions impact on the future, and therefore avoiding stuff that's wrong. And that is sort of kind of what the prophetic intelligence is about. The prophet simply says, if you, O city, keep lying, cheating, stealing, and living unrighteously, you will self-collapse. I mean, that's what, it doesn't take a genius to work that out. But it does require a certain sensitivity. And we were reading the other day Psalm 90, where it says, 1,000 years was the wink in the eye of the Lord. So on the level of prophetic intelligence, 1,000 years is just like a wink in the eye of God. So we have to be mindful of the bigger picture, including the bigger time scale, as Druids, and I would say as Christians. That was what Christ was saying. There's many passages in the New Testament where he shows that he has that bigger picture of mindfulness. He says at one point when he sees Jerusalem, I weep over you, Jerusalem, because things are going to happen that are not pleasant, because he saw it coming. And of course, not long after his mission was sort of launched, then there was the most horrendous war between the Romans and the Jews, mass slaughter, killing, you name it. But as a peace prophet, which is what Jesus was, he was trying to prevent all that violence, as should we all. So cheering on, racists that are fomenting violence in society, or misogynists that are fomenting violence against women, or religious bigots that are fomenting violence against other religions. This is all contrary to peace wisdom, to the peace Druid message and the Christian message. We should be standing for love, which is about inclusiveness and recognizing the other, the self within the other, is the eye of the beloved. So, yes, the Druids were respected elders, and the reason was because they upheld truth and non-violence and peace and amity and friendship, and we know that from the texts we've got. As I said, they travelled the length and breadth of the Celtic world, seeking to build lasting peace, love and beauty, and to shine some hint of supernatural enlightenment into people's lives, because ultimately love, that spiritual force that we love and gravitate towards, and when you fall in love it's magical, or when you see an animal that you love, it brings this heart resonance, if you want, and people are studying that now at the Institute for Art and Math. So the heart resonance is about co-connecting with an energy field. And actually the whole planet is one energy field. There's an ecosystem of love, which is what we're all part of. And yes, there is death, but that's part of the system of life. But it's never violent, cruel, sort of sadistic death in nature. It's just survival of one species. And that, so death and life are interwoven, but the point of it is life. And therefore, violently killing another human was outlawed in all these cosmic traditions. Moses said, "Thou shalt not kill." So how do you do it? How do you bring that supernatural enlightenment to people so they wake up? Yes, well, we just had a course in Bournemouth talking about enlightenments, plural. I believe that all the traditions teach some kind of enlightenment. They call it moksha, they call it nirvana, they call it samadhi, they call it awakening or awareness or liberation. I mean, as a linguist, I've studied all the different vocabulary around enlightenment, and the common theme is it's rising above conflict, violence, the mayas of Maya, and seeing it from the perspective of the transpersonal, from the Brahman perspective. Because your Atman is the same with Brahman, according to the Upanishads. And that means we can see things with the eye of God. When your Atman becomes infused with Brahman, with the higher consciousness, then that is enlightenment. That is the download of the absolute awareness into the individual soul, which then can't kill, can't lie, can't cheat, can't do these foolish things that cause suffering, because you now see them from a bigger picture. Here in Avebury, we've been listening to the beautiful rooks that fly around, cawing. They're seeing things from a bigger picture, That's why birds have always been a shamanic symbol of enlightenment, and the Druids love their, the different birds as symbols of that. The merlin, the eagle, and the raven and so on. So another question is, what should Druids say about other religions? Well, the idea of other religions is actually silly. I've got this brilliant quote from Kant where he says, the idea of there being many religions is just a metaphysical mistake. There's one ultimate truth, therefore there's one ultimate religion. All the historic religions are just historic manifestations of that. Whether you are born into a Buddhist, Christian, animist, pagan, Druid, whatever background, it's a vehicle, it's a path, which gets you to the place of unity, which is, as I say, it's the downloading of the divine consciousness into the individual. And yes, did the Druids teach that? Yes, of course they did. Do we have the Druid version of the Upanishads? Sadly not. We lost the text. It was never probably written down even. The Romans turned up and killed too many of us. But it lives on in what we call the termas. So in the Buddhist tradition, sages like Padmasambhava would leave teachings for future generations in the ether of sacred places. And sages that would come later would be able to read that in the etheric form. Now, I believe places like Avebury and Stonehenge and Glastonbury and Iona and places, these are our Celtic Druid termas locations. If you come here with piety and the love of wisdom in your heart and just sit and download, you will absorb the teachings. I had that experience at the age of 19 when I went to Stonehenge, when it was still a free open access. One May morning when I walked out of the University of Bristol philosophy degree, because it was